Hi, my name is Emem-Esther Ikpot. My net ID is EUI3 and my student ID number is 3889487.
Hi, my name is Christine Nicole Estime. My net ID is CNE26 and my ID number is 3841048.
Okay, so for our personal lecture today, we are going to be talking about what does it mean to be Black, ethnic identity formation among Black adolescents. So the scope of this issue, problem, or new information, we want to focus on Blackness and what does it mean to truly be Black and how that forms adolescents' identity. So normally when people think of being Black, they normally think, oh, it's just this, oh, she's Black, just this one defining aspect, and being Black in and of itself is a very complex idea. So first you have immigrants or you have first generation students who are coming from Africa or students who are born here and their parents are immigrants from Africa, and how that collides with African Americans who were born here and their ancestors come from the slave trade. So it's like this very huge difference between those between the immigrants and with the people who have lived here for a long time. So in our thing, we're going to be talking about forming identity and trying to understand what it means to be Black. And is this issue universal or does it impact only a select population? So for our issue, this issue of Black identity development is prevalent in the United States due to the histories of colonialism and slavery. So due to colonialism and slavery, there's a lot of for the scramble of Africa and how there are many people who live in America who don't exactly know where they are from in Africa because of the fact that they were brought here against their will, and now we have this like kind of this disillusionment with not really knowing where they connect with, or do they connect or identify with being American, or do they identify with being African? And most of the time, it's them identifying with being just being Black. And so there are main divisions, such as being middle class or low socioeconomic status, and also being from Africa or being descendants of slaves. However, sociologist Orly Clerge, in her article Black Identity in America's Lingering Racism, she talks about how all Blacks came together during the police brutality crisis. So I know many are familiar with the crisis of police brutality, and when this happened, middle class, low socioeconomic status, immigrants, first generation, all the Blacks came together to support this issue, and this kind of goes to show that despite the divisions that are prevalent in the Black community, we all come together because we all can identify with the concept of being Black. So for the theoretical basis for the topic, we outlined the stereotype threat, which we talked about in class. And with the stereotype threat, it's when you are approaching situations and you know that being Black, you are expected to do worse on something. So let's say you're going to SAT exam and they tell you, oh, Blacks perform significantly worse than whites do. So you're going to go in and you're going to perform worse because of that stressor of trying to think, oh, I need to perform at my best, but you're going to actually be performing worse because of the fact that you have that stressor on your brain. So we outlined that just to show how hard it is to not only be a student but also be a Black student because of these stereotypes and these things of, oh, Blacks don't graduate or Blacks aren't as smart as other races, and having to deal with that is a very frustrating thing. Another theory that we outlined was the phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, and this was proposed by Margaret Beale Spencer to examine the process through which one forms an identity. So it's the most widely used theory to examine the complex relations between African American youth and their context by incorporating aspects of risk and resiliency that are most relevant to people of color. So her theory explains how the links between identity and health are different for people who are living under conditions of high stress and high conflict. So with this theory, she kind of examines, especially Blacks who live in low socioeconomic areas and how that stress plays a role in their identity. So her theory emphasized the importance of an individual's plasticity, which is consistent with their DST ideology. So for example, an African American adolescent may have been born in a time where African Americans did not have access to equal education, and one's interpretation of the surrounding and one's response to negative events that may be associated with living in this historical and social context will ultimately define one's identity, and in turn influence how one will respond to those events. So in other words, things are happening to the adolescent that will shape his or her identity. However, the adolescent is an active agent in his or her own identity development process. So with this, we kind of see how that plays a role in adolescent development and how those stressors and things that you deal with in your life can have a huge toll on your identity.
Okay, so now I am going to be talking about African immigrants, which make up a small share of the U.S. immigrant population, but their numbers are actually growing and roughly doubling every decade since the 1970s, according to the new Pew Research Center analysis of U.S. Census data. And studies done by this research center has also shown that there were 1.8 million African immigrants living in the U.S. in 2013, up from 881,000 in 2000, and a substantial increase from 1970. Um, so the growth is evident among recently arrived immigrants. When compared other major groups who arrived in the U.S. in the past 5 years, Africans had the fastest growth rate from 2000 to 2013, increasing by 41%. Um, so these, like as Imam was mentioning earlier, there have been many historical events when Africans moving to the Americas in large numbers. So, for example, the transatlantic slave trade beginning in the 16th century brought hundreds and thousands of enslaved Africans, and actually the numbers are not set in stone. Many Africans were brought to the America, but significant voluntary migration from Africa is relatively a new trend. So another factor behind this recent wave can be traced to the Refugee Act of 1980, which made it easier for those fleeing conflict-ridden areas such as Somalia and Ethiopia to resettle in the U.S. back then. Back then, less than 1% of all refugees arrivals were from Africa, compared with 32% today, according to figures using the U.S. State Department's Refugee Processing Center. Um, sorry. So, a major gap in knowledge, especially on the part of policymakers, is solving the issue of employing Africans who are highly educated. According to an article that was released by Pew Charitable Trust, other immigrant groups like Latin American professionals face similar challenges too, but African immigrants in general have a harder time integrating into American workforce. Africans from relatively prosperous English-speaking countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa have an easier time navigating the system, but others struggle among recently arrived African foreign educated immigrants. The underemployment rate is 39% compared to 20% of the college educated US workers and 25% of the foreign educated immigrants. Um, so this issue does not necessarily affect children directly, rather it affects the children's parents or legal guardians. Um, the adults caring for the immigrant children develop stress, which indirectly affects the child. Because now there's an issue of communication, expressing feelings, or lack of understanding of where both parties, the parent and the child, is enduring. Um, and another thing on the child's part, like children coming from English speaking, um, not coming from English speaking nations obviously encounter language barriers. Um, and then as we learned in our previous lectures, we learned that a child's relationship with a parent is the building block for other relationships. So um, if a child is in order for a child to have like stronger relationships outside of the home, the child needs to have a great relationship with the parent. Um, so yes, to close off, to close off, so the parent and child relationship of immigrants becomes strained because of the stress that comes along with living in a foreign country and trying to become accustomed to the traditions and ways of living. And if a source of income is hard to obtain, then it just becomes more stressful. Um, any closing remarks?
And then the significance of the topic for adolescent development is just trying to basically understand the struggles of not only the immigrant, but understand the struggles of the African American and what it's like to be living in America. And then the take home message is just essentially to look at the importance of race and how race plays a role in adolescent development. And then one last point, so the societal factors that to think about I'm sorry, the current state of thinking around this issue. We're kind of thinking about what societal factors contribute to that theory of how the society plays a role in adolescent identity and, what kind of living situation you live in. For example, if you live in like urban area, it may affect you in that negative way and have an impact on how you are forming your identity. And so we're looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you.